Oh, hold on a second. I'm going to welcome everybody. Trying to broadcast this to Facebook before we begin. Having a bit of a technical issue, but if we can't resolve that, I'll go ahead and get started. We can post to Facebook later, but welcome in the meantime, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Ooh.
Hey, welcome everybody on behalf of the Holocaust Museum LA. My name is Michael Morgenstern, and I am an educator at the museum. And this afternoon, you have the honor and privilege of listening to Eva Perlman, a Holocaust survivor who was born in Germany, but from France. And afterwards, you'll have the opportunity to ask her questions. Before we begin, I would like to share a few words about the museum. Our museum was founded in the early 1960s by a group of Holocaust survivors who always wanted to make sure that future generations would remember and learn from this tragic history. In the early 1960s, the Holocaust had only ended about 15 years earlier, and most survivors were not yet willing to speak about their experiences. And unfortunately, part of the reason was that most of the world was not yet ready to hear it. Thanks to the courage and foresight of this group of survivors who met in Los Angeles, they built what became the first and oldest Holocaust museum in the United States, always with the mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. We cannot do the work that we do today to fulfill the mission of these survivors without our survivor community, including Eva Perlman, who is so active with our educational programs, speaking to students on a regular basis and participating in all of our programs to make sure that we always remember and learn from this history. Eva, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It is just a privilege to have you as a part of our community to be sharing your story with us today. Thank you so much, and you may begin, you can share your screen now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Michael, for introducing me and for the privilege, and it's my privilege and my honor to be speaking to you today. My story started, it's a miraculous journey. And before I go on, I just wanted to mention that I have written a book of my life, and the first 4 chapters cover what I'm going to speak of now. But if you want more details about my life, it's called Eva's Uncommon Life, Guided by Miracles. And you can get it on Amazon. I just wanted to say that because for the sake of time, I have to go pretty quickly through my story. Why do I have these things on my screen here? Okay, so I started life in Germany. I was born in Berlin in May of 1932, a few months before Hitler came to power. And before I go on, I just want to tell you that this story is dedicated to the bravery of several French families, not Jewish, who risked their lives to help save my family. And in particular, these people whose names you see here. They are really righteous Gentiles, and I wish they would all be inscribed in the Holocaust Museum in Yad Vashem in Israel, but they didn't risk their lives enough. So I was told we cannot inscribe them, but they helped to save our lives, and I'm forever grateful to them. This is a picture, an old picture of the village where my mother grew up, which used to be in Germany, and then it went to Poland, then came back to Germany, and now it's back in Poland. It's called Driesen, and my grandfather had a shop right here on the main piazza in the middle of town. Adolf Levine was his name. He was called Adolf before the name became just a horrible one. He had a shop of silvers. He was a silversmith and a clockmaker. And he had a good shop. There are my grandparents in front of the store. And these are my grandparents, my mother on the left, my grandmother, my grandfather, and my uncle, my brother, my mother's little brother by 2 years, Alfred. They grew up. A lot of anti-Semitism even as they were growing up. My mother already knew of anti-Semitism in high school. And she was born in 1910. So by the end of the 1910s, or yeah, before 1920, no, before 1930, she was already experiencing anti-Semitism in school. Anyway, her dream was to become a doctor, to take care of her mother. When she was 5, her mother was very ill, and my mother absolutely, her passion was, I want to become a doctor to take care of my mother. And so she was at the Berlin University in medical school in 1930. She got there in 1930. And she was studying. She met my father in 1931. It was love at first sight, and they got married a year later, and I was born a year after that. My uncle grew up also. He is on the left. He married my Aunt Silly, and Hitler started and kept the Jews from working. So my father was a patent attorney. He was working with an older gentleman who wanted my father to take over the office eventually. And as soon as Hitler started against the Jews, my father could no longer work and earn a living. So he had, fortunately, a wonderful colleague in Paris, a Frenchman, not Jewish, Monsieur Placereau, who wrote to my father and said, if life becomes difficult in Germany, come over to Paris and you'll work with us right away. So my father had the wisdom and the intelligence to take him up on it, to take up this opportunity. And by August of 1933, my father already went to Paris. I stayed in Berlin for a while my mother was still going to school, and I was taken care of by my paternal grandparents who took care of me during the day when my mother wasn't there. In October 3rd, she received a letter from the president of the Berlin University, which says, you are hereby excluded from further studies at the University of Berlin because of your Marxist activities. My mother was not politically minded. She just wanted to be able to go to the library to get books for free to study because she didn't have the money to buy them. And so that she belonged to a socio-democratic group of students on campus. So anyway, all the Jews then were told to leave. And that was in October of 1933. All the Jews were given 20 minutes. The doctors, the surgeons, the lab people, the nurses, the professors, everybody had to leave. They had 20 minutes to empty their lockers and disappear. And the surgeons were saying, we can't leave our patients on the operating table. And they were told, let them die rather than be taken care by Jews. So it was a horrible time. So my mother picked me up and we went to Paris. My uncle, in the meantime, had gone to be an apprentice in a large agricultural complex outside of Berlin, where he wanted to learn agriculture with machines and so forth. And his boss received this letter on November 17th, 1933, which says, Monsieur Gustav Baum, the boss there, after our last meeting in mid-October, I directed you to dismiss your apprentice, the 21-year-old Jew, in a few weeks. I have been informed that you have not done so. It is unacceptable that today a Jew should still be employed in agriculture, while our German brothers suffer from need and hunger and are unable to find employment with their own kind. You are hereby ordered to dismiss this Jew, or else I will have to take further action. Signed, Heil Hitler, and somebody else, Heil Hitler. So my uncle and aunt went off to Palestine. They left, and I'm leaving these two bad pictures in here because it shows you what the land of Palestine looked like, which became Israel in 1948. This was Palestine. There was nothing there, and this was the mode of transportation. That's how they arrived in Palestine, with a few suitcases. And they lived in a kibbutz, which they helped to found. From the early 30s on, 34, I think they went to Palestine. So my father's office was here in Berlin in this building, and he then went to France, and I was 18 months old when I joined when my mother and I joined my father in France, in Paris. We lived for a while in an apartment building full of German Jewish refugees in Courbevoie, outside of Paris. And eventually my mother was expecting a child in 35, my little brother, who was born the day before my third birthday, Ernest. And she was pregnant again by 1939, and they moved to Le Vésinet, in a villa in Le Vésinet, which was a little bit further from Paris, but not that far, 20 minutes by train from Paris. And we lived in Le Vésinet for a while. And then things became difficult in Germany. And my father sent his in-laws, my maternal grandparents, 2 tickets, this is for my grandmother, 2 tickets to board the Trenton ship in Marseille to go to China on the 9th of March, 1939. In France, we put the day before the month. So that was 9th of March. And then we had no news from them for a while. My grandmother wrote to my mother and said, I put 2 trunks in the mail for you on a ship to you because we can't take them with us. They are just old clothes that we can't take, so please keep them for us just in case we see you again. And so my mother was 8.5 months pregnant with a huge baby when she was called to the main railway in Paris to come and pass customs with 2 trunks that had come. So she went, and she was very, very unhappy. The guy there was very unpleasant. He said, oh, why don't you, he heard my mother speak with a foreign accent, and he said, why don't you go back where you belong, where you came from? We don't want you here. And she got very, very angry and said, well, if your parents were in danger like this, wouldn't you want another country to take them in or whatever? And so he said, well, open the trunks. And she got so mad and so red in the face that he was afraid she would have the baby right there and then. And he said, okay, just F off, take your junk and go. So she came home by taxi and she opened the trunks. And sure enough, there were old clothes on the top. But inside was a lot of silver that my grandfather had tried to keep, to preserve. He had moved with my grandmother to Berlin in the late 30s because there was no more business for him, for the Jew in their little village, except for a few wedding rings that the young men wanted to buy their brides before leaving for the war. And in Berlin, he had another store, and he bought a lot of silver and jewelry from Jews who wanted to leave the country and who couldn't take their silver with them. They wanted money for it. So he bought a lot of silver, which he put in those two trunks. The miracle was that my mother didn't know there was all that silver in the trunks. Otherwise, she could not have been so genuinely angry. She would have been scared stiff that it would cost her a lot or they would take it all. So anyway, sometimes ignorance is bliss. It pays to be ignorant. So many miracles in my life happened like this. So while my mother was in the hospital with her third child, she was very, very worried, and we didn't know what happened to my grandparents. We finally found that they got to Marseille out of Germany. Instead of boarding the Trenton ship to China, they decided to board a little illegal ship to Palestine, this one. This is a publication that happened in Palestine at the end of 39, I guess. And here's my grandmother at the left, at the bottom. This is my grandmother. She happens to be on that photograph. They had a horrible trip of 6 weeks between Marseille and Palestine. The British turned them away. They went to Cyprus. They didn't have enough to eat. They came back. They were turned away again. It was just a horrible, horrible trip. But at the end, my uncle was already in Palestine and welcomed his parents and helped them to settle. And they then lived in Palestine, which became Israel. My paternal grandparents managed to leave Germany, I don't know how, in August of 1939, and they came to live with us. So here we are, my grandparents, me, and my brother Ernest. So I'm 7. In 1939, I'm 7. He is 4. He is 4, and this baby is just a few months old, 3 months old. He doesn't look too well. Anyway, we lived there. And then the Germans started to invade France from the north, and we started our trek south. First of all, Monsieur Placereau, my father's boss, asked my father to take some of the archives of the office and take them safely down south to this area here in a little castle that he rented. Those archives were important because they had to do with French security. And at the same time, it also saved my father to get out of Paris because my father was much more Jewish looking than the rest of us. And Monsieur Placereau felt it was good to send him away. So he took my brother and me, Ernest and me, to Marseille, where we were taken care of by an old lady. And then we heard sirens all the time, and we went into the basement all the time. And one day when we emerged from the basement after a bombing, we found that a huge piece of bomb had come through the glass roof of the veranda under which my father had his office desk and chair. And the piece of bomb went straight through his chair. So had he stayed in his chair, he would have been killed instantly. we were protected. I am sure that I believe in God with all my might, and I thank him every day of my life. I was also taken with appendicitis, acute appendicitis, and I was operated within a few hours. And the doctor said to my father, she is lucky, we are lucky that she is living, because she would not have made it if we had waited another few hours. So by the time the Germans advanced more south, my father decided, okay, it's time to go to Lyon. So he picked up my brother and me, and we went to Lyon, where my father rented the upstairs of an apartment in the suburbs of Lyon. And if you look at the map before I leave this one, Grenoble is down here, and the mountains where we ended up were southwest of Grenoble, eventually. So we went to Lyon and we lived there, and then my mother decided to come to join us. My grandfather had died, unfortunately, and she had not been able to tell my father that her father had died, his father had died. And she was alone there to do his funeral. It must have been a terrible time. We didn't have any communication, obviously. So my mother, my grandmother, and the baby tried to come to Lyon to join us. And they had to pass this demarcation line between the occupied zone in pink and the blue zone in blue down below. And you see that Lyon is still in the unoccupied zone, in the free zone. So again, at the front, at the border there of the two zones, my mother had great trouble. Again, this was a French guy at the border who said, well, you and the baby, you can go, the old woman stays behind. And my mother made such a fuss. She said, I can't leave her behind. You oblige me and the baby to stay with her. We are not going to leave her. And if anything happens to us, it will be on your conscience. And she made such a fuss again that finally he said, okay, just go. He needed to get rid of them. My mother was a very strong, courageous woman. I don't know how she did it, but it is well known that in times of great difficulty and death risks, you summon up strengths that you didn't know you had. So anyway, they got to Lyon, and we lived in Lyon for a while. And then in 1942, Lyon became very dangerous also. So my mother went to the mountains southwest of Grenoble to find a home for children, like where there were many in those days, where French people put their children during the summer for a week or 2 weeks or 2 months so that they could go on vacation by themselves. So it was a beautiful place, like a camp, but in dormitories in a regular house. And she went to 30 of those homes speckled all over the countryside, and they were all full. Nobody could take 3 more children. And the last one that my mother went to was called Clairefontaine. Oh, this is a picture of us when we went to Clairefontaine. That is before we went, I guess. Yeah, Lyon, 1942. So I'm 10, he is 7, he is 3. And she found Clairefontaine in Autrans. This is Clairefontaine at the time, directed by a Monsieur and Madame Menthonnex, and Madame Menthonnex said to my mother was desperate by then, and she said, I will take your children. And they risked their lives by sheltering 3 Jewish children. And they are inscribed in the Yad Vashem Museum in Jerusalem as righteous Gentiles. So here's a picture of Madame Menthonnex here, and I'm standing next to her, and then my brother Ernest is here, and I have no idea where Raymond is. He must have been sleeping or napping. So, oh, and this is the diplôme d'honneur that they got. You see it's written in Hebrew and in French from Yad Vashem in 1996 or 1996. So my mother came to visit us 2 or 3 times while we were alone there for 9 or 10 months. And the last time she came to visit, before she left, she got a telegram from my father from Lyon, stay up there, I'm coming. And so my father decided it was time for him to disappear as well. So he joined us in Autrans and he rented the upstairs of this house here. Our landlord and landlady lived downstairs and the house was yellow. We called it all our lives the yellow house. And we lived upstairs with one entrance to the house and then the stairs going straight up. This is our family there when we started living there in Autrans. And our landlord and landlady also, they were risking their lives, but my father was paying rent. So we didn't live there because they were so kind to shelter us, which would have helped them to get inscribed in Yad Vashem. But they weren't, but they knew who we were and they helped us live there and nobody betrayed us. In France at that time, during the war, there were many good people in France who helped Jews and there were many bad people who betrayed them. And the Nazis would come in the middle of the night to pick them out of their warm beds and take them straight to Auschwitz or wherever. So these are the 2 girls of the Raveau family. And Colette was my age and her sister was already 20 or so. So my mother had to set up shop suddenly in an apartment which didn't have enough stuff in the kitchen. And so she decided she had to go to Lyon to pick up some utensils. And so at the risk of her life, it was already dangerous. She took the bus from Autrans down to Grenoble. Autrans was about 3,000 feet altitude and low mountains. It was a very nice place. The bus from Autrans to Grenoble, the train from Grenoble to Lyon, and then the tramway along the Rhône River. The station was here, let's say. She had to cross this bridge on foot and pick up a tramway that went along the Rhône River all the way to where she had to get off to run home. So she picked up all her things in Lyon and she had a nice talk with our landlady down below, downstairs, who invited her for a cup of tea. And suddenly my mother said, oh my God, I can't miss my train. And she said, hello, thank you and goodbye in a hurry, picked up her heavy load and ran down the hill to get the tramway. And fortunately, the tramway, which went every about 20 minutes, was about to leave. So she didn't have to wait. She jumped on it. And the tramway again went along the Rhône River to that bridge. She got off and ran across that bridge, barely made it into the train. The guy was whistling on the platform when she arrived running on the platform. And she jumped on the train. And the train would pass by on a parallel bridge, the railroad bridge, parallel to the one she had just crossed running. And the train would go the other way on its own bridge. And as my mother was still huffing and puffing and taking off her coat, she was looking out the window and she saw that the Germans had cordoned off the 2 sides of the bridge and were examining all papers, asking all people for their papers. And my mother would not have come back to us. She still had her old French identity card because we were French by then. We were naturalized French, but she was still born in Dresden, Germany. And with her name Gutmann, she would not have made it. She would have been much too suspicious. Also with that load that she was carrying, she would have been thought to be of the resistance or something. So it was a matter of minutes between her running over that bridge and looking at the bridge was full of Nazis. Miracle upon miracle upon miracle. All my life, I've had things like this, or we have had things like this happening to shelter us. And I'm forever grateful and I count my blessings every day. So this is Autrans. This is the valley of Autrans. I wanted to show you what it looks like in the winter. I don't have a picture of the summer. How did we live there? My father was able, Monsieur Placereau in Paris, they had established another office in Lyon. Monsieur Placereau made it possible for my father to continue working part-time from Autrans. Of course, my father didn't have a telephone, they didn't have even a typewriter. My father did everything by hand, but every week a secretary from Lyon came to Grenoble by train. My father came down by bus to Grenoble. They exchanged files. She would give him new files to work on, and he would give her the files he worked on the week before. So he could continue to work part-time, and he was paid part-time to be able to take care of the family. So he would take his bicycle and do the rounds of the farmers 3 times a week to get 1 or 2 eggs here, maybe a cup of milk there straight from the cow, not pasteurized, a cup of milk there. And he took he used his tobacco tickets and his alcohol tickets that he had, and of course some money to buy food as much as he could find for us. And we did not starve. We had just enough to eat, but we were okay. I was able to go to a boys' school there for 1 year of schooling. There were a few girls in that school because of the circumstances. They took girls. My father had found a cave in the mountains where he hid some hard-boiled eggs, some drinking water, and some money, just in case the Nazis were coming up the mountain and looking for Jews, of course, everywhere. And we would have to get off into the mountains. He had also found 3 farmers who each was willing to take one of us children. And if the Nazis really came to Autrans and they came to that farm, the farmer would have said, this is my nephew or niece from Lyon. They didn't have enough to eat in Lyon, so we took him in, or her. And we went there 2 or 3 times. My father took us quickly because the Germans were coming. We had lots of alerts, and they disappeared into the mountains. You see that they are treed. There are trees there, the forest. We had many false alerts, but they were alerts nonetheless. And we had a system, a network of getting everybody warned. The Germans are coming, the Germans are coming. From the post office in the plain near Grenoble, when they saw the first tanks and Nazi material coming up the road, the first post office would call the next post office, which will call the next, that will call the next. And from each post office, 2 people would immediately run, one to the baker, one to the hotel. And from the baker and the hotel, 2 people would run to warn 2 more people, and 2 more people ran. And within 5 minutes, everybody who needed to disappear in the woods knew the Germans are coming up, and they disappeared in the forest. We had many such alerts. Many were false because the Germans had very heavy equipment, and the mountain, gravelly, very sinuous mountain roads would not easily take to all that materiel. So anyway, in June we lived there. Oh, my mother also got new identity cards for herself and my father after the cards fell in the wash and became illegible. That was the only way she could get new cards at the local courthouse. And so they got new cards, and my parents had French names and so forth, and they were born somewhere in France. My parents did their best to hide their utmost anxiety from us children. I mean, I knew we were being pursued, we were in danger, but I was pretty immature at my age of 10 or 11. And we just lived, we made the best we could. And then the Americans came, the beautiful Americans came on June 6, 1944 to Normandy. And we were all so happy in France. And we thought, oh, okay, hopefully the war will be over soon. My father also listened to the radio, to the BBC under a cushion once at night for 15 minutes, because all our communications were completely controlled by the Nazis. So he listened to the BBC, and actually then my parents never heard anything about the concentration camps and what really happened in Europe, especially in Poland and Germany, about the Holocaust. They never heard anything about it until after the war, which is incredible that we didn't hear. Anyway, so on the 14th of July, we went on a picnic on the top of a mountain, and we heard planes coming. So my father said, I hope these are American planes. And we watched them come over us while we were eating, and then we saw them bombing the valley below us. And obviously they were Nazi planes, not American ones. So we ran down the hill, and my father vowed, he said, if I have to die, I will die with a weapon in my hand. And so the next day he enlisted with 2 of his male friends into the underground French forces and left the women and children to fend for themselves. And thank God the men were gone. They looked very good Jews with a good big nose and less hair, not much hair. They looked very Jewish, and thank God they were gone, because the next day or within 2 weeks, the Germans really came to Autrans. And I remember them. I see them still in my mind's eye. Coming at dusk, we saw the silhouettes coming in. The next day we opened our shutters. There was a farm burning here and a farm burning there, and a young man of 17 who was not even Jewish, who was scared. He ran and they shot him to death. And suddenly the next day, or the following day, our landlord calls my mother from downstairs. Madame, he shouts up the staircase. Madame, can you please come and help me? So my mother came down the stairs facing 2 Nazis, a colonel and his orderly, leaving, and she left 3 kids upstairs. I cannot imagine my mother's anguish and fear and bravery. Her landlord asked her to do the interpretation of what the Germans wanted, because they didn't know French and he didn't know German, so they couldn't understand each other. And she spoke to the Germans in very broken German with a French accent, just stringing words together without making regular sentences and trying to think of the word coming and so forth. And they never knew that she spoke German just like they did. And what happened was they wanted a bedroom in the house. They would be eating their meals with our landlord downstairs, and they needed a place to sleep. So the landlord said, well, madame, since your husband is not here, why don't you give your bedroom? I'll give you a cot to sleep in the attic. And so we had 2 Nazis sleeping in the bedroom next to the Jewish children for 2 weeks, while my mother spent 2 weeks at the attic window because she had no news from my father, and she was afraid that he would come in the middle of the night and throw a pebble against their bedroom window to alert her to come and unlock the door downstairs for him. So must have been a horrible time. So the orderly came to bake a chocolate cake in our kitchen, and my mother stayed there and spoke to him in her very broken English, and even joked with him about his wife who had a bakery and who was employing a French prisoner to help her in the bakery. And my mother said, "Ooh, a French prisoner," and that really made the guy very scared suddenly for his wife. Anyway, so finally the Germans left after 2 full weeks, and my mother still didn't know what happened. And then we had the main Oh, and fortunately, they didn't burn the house down like the Nazis did. Every time they stayed somewhere, before leaving, they would burn the place down and kill the inhabitants. And fortunately, again, fortunately, they were in a great hurry to leave, and they didn't have time to do anything else but take their stuff and go. So the story of the bicycle is really one of the greatest miracles in my war story, and I can only allude to it because of time difficulties here. And if you want to read it all, please get my book on Amazon, Eva's Uncommon Life. This is the story of a bicycle accident that saved my mother's life and her young friend who went with her. If they hadn't had that accident, they would have gone on their bicycles straight into German armies and they would have been lost. The whole area there was completely surrounded and invaded by Nazis, and they killed everyone. There are some villages there near Grenoble that were completely annihilated. They killed from the newborn to the centenarians. They killed everybody. And that's where my mother would have ended up with her friend, going to meet my father, whom they had received a message from a month before. And had they not have that accident, which stopped their journey right there and then, they would have been lost to us. And my father found them on the road on his way back to Autrans. Don't ask, it's a movie, but it was a true story and a true providential miracle. I mean, God's miracle that that they had that accident. So we returned to, in the fall of 44, Lyon was liberated. The Italians by then had joined the French people. After being friends with Germans, they now became French friends, and they helped to push the Germans back up north. And my parents, we returned to Lyon to our apartment, and we found a letter which was like this, a form letter, which came from Palestine, written by my grandparents, who had been told, and I thought it was the Red Cross, but maybe I'm mistaken, but it came from Delegatio Apostolica, i.e. from the Vatican, a letter that was a true denunciation. The people in Palestine were so worried about their relatives in Europe, so they were given a chance to write a letter like this, with their address and phone number, with their religion, Jewish, and their race, Semitic, that they are well, but they want of our news. They want to know, to hear from us. And it was really a true denunciation. And somebody in some post office somewhere, we never knew, changed our name Gutmann, Gutmann, to Gutmavor, V-O-R, instead, to hide the end of the name, to make it perhaps a little less obviously Jewish. We don't know, but that is what we found when we got there. So this is my family after the war, my mother and me. And then of course I went to school and life became normal again, and I started learning about Judaism, and I started learning Hebrew. And again, the way I met my husband was a true love story at first sight. He was my soulmate, like you wouldn't believe. We thought of a possible marriage in 45 minutes. He was sent to me by friends in Israel. I was angry. I did not want to meet him. And when we laid eyes on each other, that was it. We were married in 5 weeks. It was also another miracle in my life. This is my family at our civil wedding, with my parents in the middle, my 2 brothers who have grown up, Ernest and Raymond, my husband and me. And then in 2011, again, another miracle in my life, without looking for anything and not knowing about this, I found out about the March of the Living, which is an annual trip for 18-year-old students just before they graduate from high school. It's a 2-week trip, 1 week in Poland, 1 week in Israel. In Poland, we visit old cemeteries, old synagogues, and we hear about, and of course, the concentration camps, and we are accompanied by teachers and guides and people who tell us all about what happened, where it happened. And it's a life-changing trip for these young people, and it was life-changing for me as well. And I've been there 9 times, 9 consecutive years with the students from LA. 200 students, 4 or 5 survivors telling their story while we drive, and 25 or so staff members. The next year, my daughter and her husband came in a separate group. There are lots of groups going who are not students, but adults who go at the same time. And we all walk out of Auschwitz on Holocaust Day. That's why it's called the March of the Living. We walk from Auschwitz to Birkenau, the extermination camp for Auschwitz. This map I saw in Auschwitz, and I could not believe it. I stood there for 10 minutes in awe and trembling. Lyon, you see where Lyon is, and we were about there, away from Lyon. These are the railways of the Nazis bringing all the deportees to Auschwitz from up to 1,500 miles all around. The cattle cars. So what I forgot to tell you is that in Clairefontaine, remember the home for children where Madame Menthonnex was kind enough to keep us? I was 10 at the time and her son was 11. And we had a love story going. I mean, just like kids, what do they know about love? We didn't even hold hands, but we kept the cows together in the meadows. And we went together to unearth carrots in the garden because we were hungry and we ate them. So 70 years later, my granddaughter in Israel found Jean Menthonnex, the guy who was 11 when I was 10. He was already very, very sick with lung cancer and he doesn't look very good. But I went with my daughter and my granddaughter to visit him and his wife in southern France after the March of the Living in 2012. And I'm so happy we did. He gave me such a hug. After 70 years, we had never spoken to each other in between, but he remembered just as much as I did. And he was so happy to see us. Unfortunately, he died less than a year later. So we really saw him. I'm so happy that we saw him. And then he gave us the name and the phone number of the younger of the 2 girls of our landlord and landlady who still lives in the yellow house. And the house is still yellow. And this was the old picture. This is the new one. The new house is still yellow. They made a roundabout here in the street. But you can see that the church is still there. It's the same angle. And they added the lamppost. And you see those 2, you remember those 2 girls of the Raveau family? These are the 2 ladies, and I'm in the middle. And when we saw each other, it was like we had never lost touch with each other, how we were bonded by what happened during the war. And I asked them, weren't you afraid when you had the Nazis in the house? And they said, oh no, we already had 2 Nazis, so nobody would come and bother us. So I have to go very quickly now. I made some friends, German friends, not Jewish friends, who work for Jewish causes because they feel the responsibility and the guilt of what their fathers and grandfathers did. And they put these plaques they are called stumbling stones, that they put in the sidewalks in front of homes of Jews who were taken from there by the Nazis and straight to their death, from homes and stores. And here's the same lady who is showing my granddaughter the plaques, where you see how small they are and you have to really bend at least to read them so as to pay homage at the same time. And 80 years later, this lady invited me to go back to Berlin, which I left when I was 18 months old. And I went for the first time back to Germany. I saw the university where my mother was studying medicine and the building where my father had his office. And then they took me to Driesen, the place where my mother was born and raised. And this is the old postcard. This is the new Driesen. You see that it's the same courthouse is still there. And even this funnily shaped house is still there as well. But it's now a green place. And these are the two ladies, two German ladies who work for the Jews and who know more about me than I know about Judaism. They belong to the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, and they raise money for Israel. So I just wanted to finish with my family. This is my eldest daughter, her husband, their two daughters and their children, their sons-in-law, my son with his wife, my second daughter with her family, my 6 grandchildren, and my 3 great-grandkids. These 2 live in Jerusalem. That one lives in Boston. She's almost 11 months old. And this is my book here, Eva's Uncommon Life Guided by Miracles. And if you want to know more, it's available on Amazon. Thank you so much for your patience and for listening. I'm ready to take your questions.
Thank you so much, Eva, for sharing your story with us this afternoon. If anybody has any questions, please use the Q&A box, and those watching on Facebook can type your questions in the comments, and we'll get through as many questions as we can. Let's see, anybody, while we're waiting for some questions, well, for everyone to reflect, when is the first time that you shared your story with your family and then publicly with the group?
Well, with my family, probably when they were teenagers. I'm sure that they heard my story from I don't remember, but we always talked about Autrans and Madame Menthonnex and the Yellow House. So as soon as my children were able to comprehend, I guess, we told them how grateful we are that we survived the war. You are welcome. Anonymous attendee, you are welcome. How did the survivor handle the trauma of hiding? Well, I was traumatized in the fact that I grew up with a huge inferiority complex in France, both being Jewish and being born in Germany. And I had a slight accent in French, a German accent in French, just like I have in English, because I only spoke German with my mother until the age of 5 when I started going to school. I never went to nursery school. She was a housewife at home. She couldn't go back to her medical studies, and that actually wrecked her life. She said to me one day in her 80s, "I've wrecked my life." She could never get over it. I mean, she was really traumatized by the war.
Thank you for sharing. I can read the questions for you. Also, so that the audience will be able to follow as well. When your father returned, was it safe for you and your siblings to leave the children's house?
Well, as safe as it was at the children's house. I mean, we didn't know if the Germans would come up the road, but we just hoped for the best. I don't think we were more in danger in the Yellow House than in Clairefontaine, as long as the Nazis stayed down in Grenoble and didn't come up the mountain. But once they came up to Autrans, it was anybody's guess. You know, they would go everywhere looking for people. And they were not only Jews they were looking for, and there were lots of other people hiding in Autrans as well. Autrans had 1,000 inhabitants in peacetime. And at that time, we were 2,000 people living in Autrans, which means half the population was hiding for one reason or another, mainly Jews.
Thank you for sharing. Can you please explain to the audience a little bit about how Nazi authorities could tell who was Jewish and who was not Jewish?
I don't know, maybe they went, I have no idea. I know that in the worst days in Paris, they would stop Jews, men in the street and get them to lower their pants. If they were circumcised, that was it. They also asked Jews, men Jews, are you a Yid? Yid is Yiddish for Jew. And if the Jew said no, then he was, because he understood what the German was saying. A true Frenchman would not have understood. What is that? You know? But I mean, they went through all the houses and probably threatened the concierges and the managers of places, you know, give us your Jews or it's your life. So people very often just gave up people.
Thank you for sharing. What happened to your parents? When did they pass away?
My father passed away in 1974. He was 72. He continued to work with Monsieur Placereau and became a partner actually with Monsieur Placereau and other people in the same office until the day before he died. He died of a massive heart coronary, and my mother heard him speak the night before when she left him after visiting him and saying that she was coming back the next day. She heard him say on his phone to Monsieur Devant, another partner, you know, my cher Pierre, my dear Pierre, you know that I'm always here for you. And the next morning when she came to see him, he had died. So he died in 74, and my mother lived until 2001, and she had Alzheimer's, and she had a terrible death. It's terrible. Alzheimer's is a terrible, terrible disease. And she had to be hospitalized, but she died at 90 in 2001. My brothers are still living in Paris.
Did your grandchildren get to meet your mother or get to know her?
Yes, very well, yeah. My mother had a lot more patience than I ever had, and she colored with them and she played with them and cut out little folded papers in a way to make little ballerinas. My mother was really very artistically minded. I am not. I am good with math. I have a completely different mindset. She was an artist. She played the piano. She wrote verse. She wrote verse in French, in English, or in German that rhymed. She was really, really talented for that. And my grandchildren knew her well.
Thank you for sharing. It's nice to know that your grandchildren got to know their great grandmother. And when did your husband pass away?
He passed away in 1988 of leukemia. He was 55. So we had 32 years of marriage, and he was a few months younger than me. So we could still be married if he had lived. But he died at 55, and we had 32 years of marriage. And I've been widowed longer now than I've been married, but time passes and helps sorrow. And I've learned to be positive and to be optimistic and to thank God for all my blessings and to be grateful, to live a life of gratitude. I am so grateful for my life and my children and my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren and my friends, and for what I can still do now. I still drive, and I'm happy.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I know I can also vouch for the fact, sharing with the audience, that Eva shares that message with young students on a regular basis, which I think is very important. And this is one of the reasons we're so happy to have you as a part of our community.
I love the students. I love going with them on those trips, and I hope I can go again. Who knows? We'll see. I love being with the students.
Well, in the meantime, we're so glad that you're able to meet with students virtually, even if it's not the same, but you're able to still do this and have such a strong impact. Moving a little forward in this part of your life. So what brought you to Los Angeles? And can you talk about the places where you lived after you were liberated?
Okay, well, I lived in France until I met my husband when I was 24 and he was 23. My parents had sent me to live in Israel when I was 18 for a year because I did not know what I wanted to study, and I didn't like Israel because my mother was too busy with Israel, and I rebelled because she was never home. So I spent a year in Israel, and then I met my husband, and we first went to Oxford, where he started graduate school in social anthropology. From there, after 2 years, we went to Uganda, where he did research in the field towards his PhD at Oxford. We stayed for 3 years in Uganda. We went with one child and we came back with three. Three were born in Uganda, thanks to a medicine man. It's all in my story if you want to read it. And then back to Oxford for his PhD. And then he got 2 offers. When we met, we wanted to live in Israel. And he got 2 offers when he got his PhD at Oxford, one from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem and one from Berkeley. And my husband's mentor said to him, "I'm sorry, Mel, if I were you, I would take Berkeley. That comes once in a lifetime. You can always go to Israel later." So we went to Berkeley. We had 3 children. The $7,000 salary at the time, annual, was very inviting. $7,000 for an assistant professor in 1963. 63, yeah. And so from Berkeley, then the 60s in Berkeley were very full of movement. And so in 1970, we went to Canada, and my husband taught at Brock University in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, until he passed away in '88. And then I came back here to Los Angeles because my eldest daughter had married a Jew here, and they had a Jewish life. My other 2 children had intermarried, and I had absolutely no connection with their in-laws. So we had decided, my husband and I, when he retired, we would come to live in Los Angeles. So a year after he passed away, I came on my own, and I made my life here.
Thank you for sharing with us. And
I had to learn to become a person in my own right instead of just part of a couple.
Of course. Well, I'm sure on behalf of our audience as well, we don't know people who have lived in as many places as you have, but we're so glad that you have memories and stories from and experiences from all of these places. A similar question, when you came to the United States, did you come by ship?
We came by ship, yes. Yeah. I remember my son, in 62 he was, in 63 he was just 18 months old, or close to 2 years, and he was carrying his potty in a plastic transparent bag. That was funny. And we came to New York, which was terribly hot. And then we went into restaurants, which were terribly cold. That was my initiation to New York. And we went to Chicago to visit some old friends of my husband's. And then we came to Berkeley, 1963, and we bought a house.
Thank you very much. I know this is not an easy question to answer, but in your mind, how do you think the German people came to a place where they would just burn an entire village? And what can we do to prevent this sort of tragedy from happening again?
Education is the only thing. And there are so many uneducated people who transmit their lack of education to their children and tell them that the Jews are vermin. It's only people trying to meet other Jews. I mean, Jews have their good people and their bad people like everybody else, but there are many good Jews. and people should just, maybe non-Jews should make the effort to meet some Jews and become friends with them. Go visit Israel. Israel, which has Christian places as well. And I know friends who only visit the Christian places when they go to Israel. But go and see something different than what you are learning at home or not learning at home. And the children, that the students I speak to, they become the eyewitnesses of the eyewitnesses, and hopefully they will transmit that knowledge. Oh yeah, I met this old lady, you know, she lived in hiding with her brothers, and they will tell their children. It's only education that can change things. And we mustn't forget.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And just to point out to the audience, even before I finished asking the question, Eva already had an answer, which was education. And that's what we seek to do with the museum and what you help us with on such a regular basis.
You are
so
doing very well. Yeah.
And I know you also mentioned, you talked about why speaking to students, which is always a good question to conclude on. So the reason you speak to students is to make sure that you educate them and that they become the witnesses to your story. We have just a couple more questions. Do you still have the silver from your grandparents?
My daughter has some of the silver. Yes, she still has those. That what you saw on the picture, the two candlesticks and the big boat with a glass thing inside. Yes, and we still have a lot of jewelry from my grandfather, which are now in my children's homes, because I live in an assisted living facility with a roommate, and I have very little space. So my daughters have everything, and my granddaughters. Yeah, it goes down. It will go down the line.
Thank you very much. We have a comment here. Your family was so well educated. It's unbelievable, especially in those years. Your mother was so brave and multi-talented. I think that's a nice comment to end on. And I'm going to end, since we talked about we concluded, you explained why you speak to students and why you're doing this today. The last question will be from me. Can you please share with everyone how your parents met?
How they met?
Yes.
They had a chance meeting like I had with my husband. They belonged to a Jewish youth group, young professionals who, and that particular Sunday, they were supposed to go for a picnic to a lake outside of Berlin. And my two parents met there. They were the only two who brought their bathing suits, knowing they went to a lake. All the others were dressed in their Sunday go meeting clothes and watched with envy from the shore. From the edge, how they frolicked in the water. That's how they met. They frolicked in the water, and the following week, my father wrote to my mother, and in a very formal, very honored Miss Levine, and you know the German phraseology. And they started going out. And when he asked her to marry him, she said, "What about my studies?" And he said, "You can continue your studies. I have a good job. Don't worry. You continue going to school." So she said, "Okay." They had a good marriage. I've been so fortunate to have only good men in my life. My grandfathers, my father, my brothers, my sons-in-law. I've been very, very blessed.
Well, thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure we shared that story. And thank you everyone for your attention, for your questions. Thank you so much, Eva, again, for helping us on such a regular basis to always fulfill the mission of the survivors who founded our museum, to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. We appreciate so much everything you do for our community and for our future by doing this. Thank you to our audience for tuning in as always, and for your intention, for being these witnesses, and for engaging with questions. A week from today, this next Thursday, is our last Public Survivor Talk of the year. So we hope you tune in for that to listen to Ben Lesser and his daughter, who will be speaking and sharing Ben's story. And we wish everybody a happy, healthy, safe holiday season. And next year, we will resume our public talks as well on Thursdays. And also, the museum is open, so please visit our website to learn how you can visit us in person, but we still have our virtual programs regularly. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Eva. Wishing you all the best.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.